Hello, everyone. I see people joining, so I'm just going to give it a few more minutes, a few more seconds for people to join. Okay, it looks like we have a good group here. Good afternoon, and good afternoon, Heather. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Camille Hoisington, and I'm Head of Strategic Projects at Traverse Connect, and it's my pleasure to kick off today's webinar, A Fresh Networking Mindset, Building Professional Relationships in a Way That Works. Just so you all know, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to the Traverse Connect YouTube page within 24 hours. So you can watch it again and share it with your network as soon as it's up on our YouTube page. This webinar today is being led by our guest speaker, Heather Hollick. Heather will speak for the first hour or so. She'll also ask you to engage in the chat function. And then there'll also be time at the end for Q&A. So if you have a question and you have a question that comes to mind during this webinar, please use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen, and your questions will either be addressed during the webinar or at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce Heather and tell you a bit about her first off. So personally, I'm really thrilled to have Heather leading this webinar. She sent me her book, Helpful, A Guide to Life, Careers, and the Art of Networking a few months ago. And the insights are fantastic. So for me, as an introverted person, I've always found networking at big events in the traditional sense to be overwhelming and not entirely useful. And Heather's book has really allowed me to shift my perspective and to think of my professional network, not just as a list of all the people I know, but instead as a web of connections to people, connections that I need to nurture and keep fresh in order to keep building those professional relationships in a meaningful way. So I'd like to now read Heather's bio, and then I'll turn things over to her. Heather Hollick is a teacher, writer, and coach. Speaking and coaching are Heather's third career. In previous lives, she managed computer data centers, delivered large, complex projects, and ran project management offices for organizations as large as 160,000 employees. She has worked for such diverse organizations as Cisco Systems, United Healthcare, and the Pensions Department of the British government. Heather started her career teaching mathematics, physics, and computer science at both the high school and college levels in Indiana, Colorado, and California. She has a master's degree in applied mathematics from Purdue University, an MBA from the University of California at Berkeley, and an undergraduate degree in math, physics, and secondary education. Heather's perspective has been honed through constant immersion in new cultures and organizations. Although now a naturalized US citizen, she was born in Ontario, Canada, and she has lived and worked in Canada, the UK, and all over the US, including Arizona, Indiana, Colorado, New Mexico, California, New Jersey, and North Carolina. Heather, you're a fascinating person. Heather is a modern nomad, and she has moved 27 times since graduating from college, living and working in 18 cities, 8 states, and 3 countries. And she now resides just north of Honor in Michigan. So we're really happy to have her here. Heather, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Camille. And hello, everyone from actually Canada this time. So thank you for your flexibility. We'd actually scheduled this a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, my mom was in passing. And so I scooted over here to Canada. She passed now almost 2 weeks ago. So I'm here at her house. The internet's good. I'm actually on the 13th day of a 14-day quarantine. So I'm really grateful for the chance to talk to anybody. Thank you for being there. I look forward to a lively session today. This is stuff that's really dear to my heart. It's all stuff that I've learned and kind of uncovered and discovered the hard way. So let's talk about today about networking. And I think to get us kicked off, let's just go right to what the heck is it with that word, right? And I hope you can see my screen. What is it with this notion of networking? Because I find that for a lot of people, it is somewhat unnerving. It is, I don't know, let's just go to the chat. just give me a few thoughts. 1, 2, 3 words. Let's just kind of engage here a bit. How do you feel about, or what do you think about when you hear that word networking? Transactional, sure enough, right? Yeah. What else? Raise blood pressure. Here, here. Small talk is something that's difficult. No kidding. Although we're going to talk about that today. Hopefully, I can set you free for that. Oh, shallow. Yeah, that's what drives me nuts, right? People just tend to be superficial. Yep. Now we're talking mutual benefit through personal relationships. Yeah, mutually beneficial relationships. Nice. Connection. Yep. Traditionally performative, maybe. I hear that. A lot of times it feels like a performance. Doesn't feel genuine. I hope we can fix that today. Yeah, I think we will. I'm sure we will, because that's how I got into this, was this sense of that something isn't right here. And my intuition said, I know there's some truth here. So I've got to kind of peel away all the stuff that isn't true and find what is true. And I think I certainly done it for me, and I've done it for not only the introverts of the world. And I will make that caveat up front, that I come at this from a perspective of an introvert. But what I've learned is that the extroverts actually are kind of have a lot to learn as well. So pay attention here, you guys, those of you of the extrovert persuasion, bless your hearts. There's a lot here that applies to both of us. So yeah, let me tell you my story. And a lot of this is really just a journey that I went through. So I progressed. I came to this pretty late to the game. I was in my early to mid 40s before I ever really figured out that this networking thing was something that I had to figure out and had to get straight. And for the first half of my career, half of my life, more than that, 2/3 of my life, I just kind of blamed myself. I knew I wasn't very good at it. I kind of took the old Popeye adage, I am's what I am's, and that's just how I roll. And I'll have to just deal with the fact that I'll never be a very good networker. And I had some kind of justifications for that, rationalizations for that in my own head. I said, I'm not very good at it because I was very cognizant of the fact I just kind of lacked basic social skills. I knew that. I was born to very blue collar, simple parents. I grew up in the country. I went to a small school. There's only 200 kids in our school, and that was for 8 grades. And there just wasn't a lot of social skills required. The only kid I grew up on like 6 acres out in the country, but there was kind of a little neighborhood, so to speak. But there's only one other human being my age, and he was kind of a goofball. So I just got by with this lack of social skills. My mom always said, don't judge a book by its cover. So I just kind of let it go. I didn't, it turns out we'll cover as we go forward today, we'll learn that networking skills are just social skills. Social skills are learned, and everybody can and should learn general social skills, but particularly networking skills. So that's part of what we're going to do today. But the biggest rationalization I made for myself, the biggest way I just kind of made excuses for myself, is I have a very strong preference for introversion. I know that. I know that's the way my brain works. I inherited that from my mom, who had an even stronger preference for introversion. I grew up in the country. I spent more time wandering down by the river or playing outside than I ever did socializing with other people. And I was happy. I was fine. So I just figured that's it. That's who I am. That's how it is. And I'll just have to make the best of it. But as time went on, I kind of realized that there was more to this. And I'd come to grips with the fact that I wasn't very good at this. But over the years, and finally, by the time I hit my mid 40s, and the truth is, when I went back to business school, so I'm going to an MBA at one of these great schools in the world, and all of these people are talking about networking, and I'm like, oh, of course, you guys, that's the thing. We're part of this network now. And I looked around, and I went crazy for it. I went to every bar of the week and pub of the month and networking on the quadrangle and every event I could find. And I had this, about 6-9 months into it was a 3-year part-time program, about 6-9 months in, I'm like, you guys, I know you're on the right track, but you're just missing something. So I became determined to figure it out. And here's what I've concluded. So I'm going to kind of start with what I think is really broken about this whole thing. And then we're going to build that back up into what works, not just for introverts, but for everyone. We can really make this a web of or a I don't know, club, whatever you will. Anyway, so networking is broken, I think, in three really significant ways. And some of this came up in the chat, right? I think that one of the ways that networking is broken, and the way we think of modern networking is broken, is we've somehow come to the conclusion that networking is about attending events. We think of the fact that if we need to network, we need to go somewhere. And that's thrown a lot of us for a loop in COVID, right? Because what do I do now? I can't go to any events. So how do I do this? I must not be able to network, right? So somehow along the way in the last 10, 20, 30 years, we've somehow equated networking with events, probably because there's no shortage of networking events, or at least there didn't used to be, right? Go to meetup.com, or everybody's scheduling that. Professional organizations have networking events. Every conference has time set aside for networking events. And so this notion of events just became the equivalent, not necessarily, events are great for networking, but they're not equivalent, right? And I think that equivalency came about because we somehow got it into our head that networking was about meeting new people. And admit it to yourself, right? If you think about, geez, I got to do some networking, or my networking is going stale or something, really what your default thought on that is that you've got to go out and connect with some new people, right? I call it the gratuitous exchange of business cards. You go someplace, you go to a professional event, you go to a conference, you go to a mixer at some club, and whatever. It's all about, but it's about meeting new people. So these two have become conflated, and they've come to equal the entirety of networking. Yes, no, events play a role in networking. Meeting new people play a role, but they're far from the entirety. It's just a small portion of it, in fact. So we're going to spend the rest of today actually talking about what the rest of it is, right? And the third part where networking was really broken and kind of kept me away from it, and this is, I think, what people were talking about when they were mentioning transactional in the chat, is that networking somehow became this notion of getting something, that if you need something, you have to network for it. And of course, the epitome of this is if you're looking for a job, you got to, work your network, right? And there's some attempted, and I really think it's somewhat false, but there's some attempted veneer on that, well, in order to get something, you have to give something first, right? So, and there's this quid pro quo sense that a lot of people teach that, no, be a giving person, because in order to get something from your network, you have to give something first. And I argue that that is just as bad. It's just dressed up in a nicer coat of paint, right? That if all you're thinking about, if networking is out there to get something, then you're really just groveling. And groveling never appealed to me. And I was never really interested in out to get something. I was born in Canada. So I guess that sense of, I think we have this more innate sense of wanting to be helpful anyway. And so this sense of wanting something, of being out there to get something. And I will say that even job hunting, you absolutely have to network to get a job. But, and I have a whole chapter of this, it's really critical. It's all in the art of seeking to be helpful. And so if you're looking for an opportunity, you're looking for a person, yes, that's networking, but you're not looking for a job. You're looking for some way to reach out and be helpful. So I find this whole groveling, and I can smell it a mile away, that even if someone's doing the whole quid pro quo thing and they're being nice to me because someday, they'll say, well, someday I might need something back. That never flew for me. It just was not the way I'm wired. So that was probably what kept me away from networking for the longest. So if it's not those things, if it's not events, if it's not meeting new people, and if it's not trying to get something, then what is it, right? So at the very beginning, and I'm going to refine this definition and add a lot more depth to it as we go, but let's get ourselves started at least with some sense of what is it then? And I'll open with this, right? That networking is simply sharing who and what you know to help other people, to help them be successful. You know stuff. You know people. You have a network. That network is an asset. And you know stuff. You have experience. You have credentials. You know stuff. And those things are valuable, and they're probably valuable to other people as well. And networking is finding ways to share them with other people in a way that helps them. That's all. So that's really the essence of today. And then the rest is somewhat the how. How do we go about this, right? Just sharing who and what you know stuff, people, make it available. If we all just kind of freely share it, it's kind of a marketplace of favors and information. And that's what networking is. It's not about getting something. It's not about going to an event. You may be able to meet someone at an event where you could share something or make an introduction, but that's not what it's about. It's about sharing who and what you know to help other people be successful, right? So I'm at business school. I'm realizing these guys are onto something with networking, but they actually don't have a clue what they're doing. And I set off on a quest to figure this out. I'm nothing if not a student, and I'm nothing if not persistent. And honestly, it took me I graduated in 2004. It took me another 3 years to really get my head about this. And I set out on a quest. I became determined to answer this simple question. What is networking? And I knew what I wanted it to be. I wanted this sense of building professional relationships in some kind of meaningful way, but how? Because what I was seeing wasn't doing that, right? Screaming at someone and 5 feet or 5 inches away from their face in a noisy bar on a Friday night didn't seem like building a professional relationship in any kind of meaningful way. It certainly wasn't for me, because those kind of noise levels just raise my cortisol so high that I'm just catatonic anyway. So that certainly couldn't have been anything. So what is it then, right? What is it? And I read a lot of books. I did a lot of field research, if you will. I actually have some great stories of, like, there was a period of about 6 months where I went to as many events as I could, and I vowed not to say a word. I just stood by the sidelines and watched. I'm like, what is really happening here? Who gets this? Who are the people who are doing this well? And then I read some really great books and did a lot of great thought on it. And I kind of figured out my own way, and it's resonating with lots and lots of people. So I hope you'll join me in it. To begin with, before we can kind of build up what it is, I got to clear some crud out of the way, because there's a lot of myths and there's a lot of misunderstandings out there of what networking is and what this little subset of social skills are that make this thing work. And I need to cover those first before we can really dive into how do I do this networking in some kind of meaningful way. And I think the first myth, and this was the one that haunted me for 20 years, the first 20 years of my career, I just felt like I didn't know what to do. Like there's some unwritten rule book out there. And what I saw people doing, I knew I didn't want to do, right? I'm not a schmoozer. I'm not a person who goes to an event and floats to the middle of the room. I'm not a person who goes out trying to get something, because I don't really want anything. So I just kind of, I don't know, I didn't know what to do. And I think a lot of us fall back on that. We just kind of feel lost. We go to events because we feel obligated, but we just don't know what to do. And the other one, and this was actually what I fell back on then, since I didn't know what to do, I figured no problem. I will make up for it because I'm smart, and I'll work hard, and I'll work long hours, and that will have to cover me, right? And I wish that were true. You have to be smart. You have to work hard. You have to do good work. Absolutely true. But it's not enough. You also have to have a good web of professional relationships and people that you're there for and are there for you. So that was a thing, that carried me through. And I did okay, actually. First 20 years of my career, did okay, hard work, but I hit the wall, or hit the ceiling, I suppose, because people realize, you're kind of a sucker. Heather will do it. Just give it to Heather. She'll do it. And that wasn't enough, actually, to really further my career and grow myself as a professional. So that doesn't fly either. Good work is important, but it's not enough. But the biggest myth, and the one that occupied years of my exploration, was this notion that if you want to be a good networker, you just have to be more extroverted. And I have articles clipped to Evernote that anytime I want to get upset, I just go pull them up, right? This whole sense of, what's your problem, right? If you want to be more extroverted, be a better networker, just be more extroverted. And that, of course, never flew with me. And we're going to get into some details on that. So I want to kind of pry into that a little bit, because that statement, just be more extroverted, is really one of those philosophical linguistic statements that is just loaded with presumptions. And I want to unpack 2 of those presumptions, because they are what get us into trouble, and they're what keep us from networking in any kind of meaningful way for our own selves. So let's unpack that just a little bit. One of the presumptions that come from that statement, right? Just be if you want to be a better networker, just be more extroverted. Oh, here we go. Extroverts. Yeah, here we're digging into this. So one of the presumptions is that what we see extroverts doing is networking. right? There's this automatic assumption that I will grant 100%. Now, extroverts are really comfortable in public. They're really comfortable striking up a conversation. They're really comfortable meeting new people. So I'm jealous. I mean, good for you. But I argue that, interrupting someone sitting next to you on an airplane to tell me about your grandkids, not networking, right? Just striking up a conversation with a person in line at the supermarket, not networking, not necessarily. So I really question that presumption that just be more extrovert. What do you mean? Because I'm not convinced that what I see the majority, and remember, I did 6 months, I just would go to events and watch. And I'm not convinced that what I see those people doing were networking in any meaningful way that I wanted to do it. Again, back to some kind of building relationships in meaningful ways. So I call that into question right off the bat, that just because I see people floating comfortably about the room and, striking up a conversation with anyone and everyone, great, good for you, wonderful set of social skills. I work on that myself, but that's not networking. Networking is something more substantive than that. And the second presumption hidden inside that simple statement is that there's only one way to network, right? Well, if you want to network, you got to do what they do, right? Do what the extroverts do. They'll show you how. And I just, that can't be true, right? The human spirit, the human species is a very complex being. And when you start pairing us up with other very complex beings, the combinations are practically infinite. And so it seems to me that there's an infinite number of ways to network. And so I was determined to find some language and find a mindset around this that fit for me and it fit for the people that I connected with. And that's really huge today. So you're going to hear me driving that home several times, is that networking is what works for you, not what other people are doing, but works for you. And what works for you and the people in your network, and that can be anything that works. And anything that doesn't work, in that case, for me, it's going to noisy events. Don't have to do it. It's not network. I may still go. I still go to bars now and then. Well, I used to, because the beer's good, but I don't go there telling myself that this is some kind of way I'm going to, network while I'm there. So, and I have to even drill into this a bit more because this becomes really the foundation of the mindset that I have around building professional relationships. I have to give you a bit of a primer on the differences between introverts and extroverts. So when I became determined to figure this out, I actually got certified Myers-Briggs practitioner. I think the Myers-Briggs is a magnificent way of understanding humans, the way they make decisions, and the way they communicate. And if that isn't central to building relationships in a meaningful way, I don't know what is. So I found the Myers-Briggs to be just spot on. Myers-Briggs, of course, has 4 categories. We're only going to talk about the first one. But the difference between introverts and extroverts is really significant here. So let's just talk about, there's lots of difference. I can spend a week on this if you want me to. It's something that I really enjoy exploring and thinking about. But there's 2 characteristics of introverts and extroverts that are related to our networking conversations. I want to dive into those just a little bit more. And the first, you're probably pretty familiar with, and most people have at least a general sense of what it means to be introverted or extroverted. And you know that relates to this idea of energy and stimulation, right? Energy mostly. But I think that's a little bit insufficient. It's not shallow or anything. It's just a little bit insufficient. So Carl Jung is the person who really came up with this discovery of the human psyche has these dimensions of introversion and extroversion. He talked about it as an orientation. He's like, introverts are literally, and you can twist your body, introverts are oriented inward and extroverts are oriented outwards. So yes, we talk about introverts needing to be alone to get energy. That's not quite right? Extroverts need to be oriented inward to get energy. I can actually be energized in a really good conversation if it's one that's got my brain going, that I'm kind of quasi-inward, quasi-talking to you, right? Extroverts are stimulated externally. The way I think makes more sense here came from, at least for me, came from Susan Cain's book. So the tipping point for introverts in our culture came, I don't remember, it was published. It's several years ago now. Susan Cain wrote this book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Won't Stop Talking. And it's this wonderful kind of blend of introvert, extrovert exploration and public policy. And so she's done a masterful job of kind of blending those two. I think she did, and that tipped us. Her TED Talk and her book really gave us permission to be introverts in a world that won't stop talking. And she introduced this idea of stimulation, and I like that a lot better, right? So I like the idea that it's really what stimulates me. I like to tell the joke that, if you gave me the choice of going out with a group of people or staying home with a good book, I'd take the book. In fact, I'd take that deal if it was a bad book. And it's dumb. My dad would be proud. It's dumb, but it's kind of true. And the reason it's true is in some ways, a bad book is more stimulating than a good one, because I'm reading a bad book. I'm like, no, that can't be right. And that plot's not consistent. And that character should have done this. And you see what's happening? My brain is just going like crazy. And I'm really stimulated there, right? So the idea that it's internal stimulation. And so at any given moment inside my head, I've got like 5 trains of thought just running all at once. And there's looking for links, and that's the internal stimulation. Another good, so that's why, by the way, don't interrupt me on an airplane, because my goodness, I'm really thinking about something. I'll look at you with this look like, pardon? Like, you just interrupted this wonderful exercise. Anyway, a good example though is how introverts and extroverts experience coffee shops differently. We both actually like going to coffee shops, although if I have some serious work to do, I can't do that in a coffee shop. So here's the difference. An extrovert gets energy externally. That external buzz in the back of the coffee shop, that's actually energizing. That is making the extrovert more energized. If you're home or you had a roommate in college who was an extrovert, it would be common for them to say, man, I have got a big project due. I got a big paper due. Do you mind if I turn some music on? That's an extrovert, right? The people who say they have the TV on in the background just for noise, those are extroverts. And that noise in the background is actually net positive for their energy. It is stimulating. It is additive. It is generating energy for them. Introverts are the opposite, right? That external noise actually is a interruption to me, and I have to actually use brain cycles to filter it out. So if I have some serious work to do, I'm going to say the opposite. Man, I've got this big project to work on. Can I turn the music off? Because I need to concentrate, right? I got my noise canceling headphones, and I never go anywhere without them, because if I have something to work on, I got to throw on the headphones. Now, I do go to a coffee shop, and I do enjoy coffee shops, and I can find them stimulating, but in this way. I'm not there writing my next book. I'm there and I'm listening, and I'm overhearing snippets of conversation, and I'm trying to guess the profession of the people in the next table. And I'm watching how the barista makes the perfect latte. And but hear that though? That's an internal activity, despite the fact that I'm sitting in the same coffee shop across from my extroverted partner who's getting stimulation from the buzz, from the music playing in the background, 2 people in the exact same location being stimulated in very different ways. So that's the energy thing. And that's relevant. I hope you can start to see in the networking thing, right? That's why events I'm not crazy about it, because they are actually de-stimulating to me. They take a lot from me to psych myself up just to go to the damn thing. And I'm not my best self there. So that's not necessarily going to be how I present my best self. And I have to find other ways to present my best self. Okay, so that's the one dimension of introvert extrovert that's highly relevant, but this one's even more. And not as many practitioners talk about this. And I think it is the most profound dimension between introverts and extroverts. You can generalize this today away from networking. You have children, you have parents, you have spouses, you have friends, you have coworkers. This is one of the biggest splits between people that I see in our culture. Actually, the second one is the next one over in the Myers-Briggs, but that's for another day. And it's this idea that, where do you think? And that phrase in and of itself is a rather odd one, right? Do you ever think about your thought process being located someplace in space? Well, it is, at least the way I think about it is. And you'll smile when I explain it to you, right? So introverts and extroverts think in very different places. So I'll start with the extroverts. Extroverts have this preference to verbalize their thoughts, to form them. The verbalization process is the thought process. That's a gross generalization. It's very extreme. I've never met actually I've met one person I think that fits that. Everyone else is somewhere in between. But for point of explaining this, let's just take the ends of the spectrum here and say extroverts need to verbalize their thoughts to form them, right? So that's this, I'll come back to that in a second. So that's this externalization of thought. And you're going to laugh now, because over the next couple of days, you're going to be in conversations with people and you're going to see people talking, and you're realizing that they're in the thought process. They're verbalizing their thoughts, and that's actually the thought process for them. Introverts, of course, are exactly the opposite. Introverts prefer to have their thoughts more fully formed before we even open our mouths. We need to have our thoughts more fully formed. In fact, part of the challenge in learning to have social skills as an introvert is to trust the fact that they're never going to be fully formed, and I got to open my mouth at some point, right? But this notion that the thoughts have to be formed first, and then I'll say them. Now, can you just see the difference in those two? So you're sitting around a conference table or on a Zoom call with some colleagues. There's two very different, and I'll argue mutually exclusive, methods of thinking going on. Right? That the extroverts are talking to think. And while you're talking, by the way, I can't think because you're talking. So I'm excluded from the thought process while you're talking. And then I need to go away for a while so I can think. And then I'll come back and tell you what I came up with. That, I think, this is a huge split in our culture, in our organizations, in our relationships. And we have to understand it. And once you understand it and you embrace it and you kind of recognize, oh, you're an introvert, go have a think about this. Then they come back. It deepens relationships significantly. Now, you are familiar with this. I know you are. I want you to think back to a time when you were in a classroom and the teacher starts asking a question. And before she even gets halfway through the question, a half a dozen kids, typically at the front of the class, have their hands up. Oh, pick me, pick me. I would be in my mid-40s. That was actually a course in graduate school when I finally figured out what was going on. Because until then, I used to think, what's wrong with me? How could they know what they're going to say? How dumb am I, or how smart are they that they know the answer already? She hasn't even said the question yet. And I was mid-40s when I finally realized what's going on. Do you see what's going on there? The people who were saying, pick me, they didn't know what they were going to say. They wanted they were confident enough in their intellectual abilities that they wanted the chance to think through the answer. They wanted the chance to verbalize them. Like, if the teacher picks me, I can speak and I'll be able to come up with the answer. So they actually needed to be called on just so they could formalize their thought. I know I'm making gross generalizations here, but that's kind of sort of how this works, right? And I'm sitting in the back of the classroom saying, I am participating. Well, first of all, I got to hear the whole question. And then I got to think about it for a few minutes. I may have to think about it for a few days before I really get what I really think about it, right? So that difference is really profound in our lives right now. And I think the way to deal with this is I'll give an example. When I was in the UK, I worked for the pensions department of the British government. We're doing this massive transformation of their IT department. And my boss was a guy named Kenny. And Kenny had come from the private sector, from Arthur Andersen consulting firm. Brilliant. One of the smartest people I've ever met, and also one of the most extroverted. And I was leading his project management office, big portfolio of projects. And we would get into, and I was also kind of significant on the team that was doing this transformation stuff. We were outsourcing or transitioning all this to outside vendors. We would get into these just incredibly vibrant discussions. And Kenny, and you almost need to see my hands, he would talk in thought bubbles. The ideas would just come streaming out of his mouth, and good ideas, and just over here and over there. And I would kind of keep up with them for a while. And then I would say, and Kenny was pretty savvy about this stuff, so this is why it worked. I would say, Kenny, I've got a really good answer for you, and I'll be back in 2 hours to tell you what it is. And he knew what that meant. And I would come back in 2 hours with a good answer. And I developed a reputation of that's the way my brain works. And it would get to the point where he would be like, don't tell me now, tell me tomorrow. What do you think about this? And that's kind of the key to this difference between introverts and extroverts, right? My partner has a strong preference for extroversion. She gets this now. She'll put stuff out on the table. She's like, don't tell me now. Let's talk about it on Friday. And just knowing that I have to noodle this stuff, right? So that's the big difference. And that is highly relevant. I mean, just think about how this relates now to building relationships in some kind of meaningful way, right? You walk up to people at an event, right? We're already on our back foot, and we start a conversation. Well, I'm not thinking because I need to think quietly. So I'm somehow hoping I can come up with something to say. I'm on my back foot. If I happen to be talking to an extrovert, you're on your front foot. you're in perfect condition. You're verbalizing, you're thinking, and I'm always at a disadvantage in a situation like that, right? But give me an email or give me 10 minutes notice. So when I do calls with people, I'm like, please give me 5 minutes notice. I'm not going to pick up the phone if you cold call me, but if you text me and say, do you have some time to chat? 5 minutes is enough. Just let me get my thoughts together. So give me time to pre-think this, right? So it doesn't surprise you perhaps that introverts have a preference for writing. Emails, we'll send you wonderful, 8-page manifestos of everything that we need to do, and extroverts will be just, well, you just pick up the damn phone. But they're both right for each other. And so part of what we need to figure out here is kind of bridging this gap between the two, right? And understanding it's not a deficiency. In fact, introverts have some, I think, to be honest, because one of the dirty little secrets of introverts is not only do we need to preform our thoughts to verbalize them, we have really no unction to verbalize them. So if you're working with introverts in your organization, there's a gold mine of ideas that are sitting right below the surface that no one's ever tapped into. They're just sitting there, right? They don't have a need to verbalize it because the ideas are in there, and you're not getting them because they haven't opened their mouth yet. So a lot of times you have to ask them, right? So that's a big difference. I hope you can see how it's highly relevant to the way we network and build professional relationships. Let me just do a really quick poll. All right, jump back into the chat. Introvert, extrovert, or somewhere in the middle. And so this Susan Cain popularized this term. Somewhere in the middle is an ambivert. Just let me see what the words are here. Where are you? INTJ, me too, Brett. Yep. Introvert, excellent. Welcome. Be free. Definitely extrovert. Thanks, Eric. INTP. Excellent. Actually, pretty split. Typical. Yeah, the split in America is about 50-50. In fact, the split in the world is about 50-50. I see various data depending on when and where, but it's generally about slightly more, 51-49 in the US was the last data I saw for introverts versus extroverts. The Myers-Briggs organization is really masterful at this. They've maintained a very high integrity data set for the last 50 years. If you, by the way, have taken a Myers-Briggs online somewhere, it's not actually a Myers-Briggs because the Myers-Briggs Association is very protective of their data, and they train us as certified, and we follow a protocol to help people grasp get a sense of what their preferences might be. Anyway, so that's where I'm getting this data from. And organizations and anytime two or more people come together, you create a culture, and that culture has its own introvert extrovert. So America is way more extroverted than the UK, for example. The individual population is about the same, 51-49. But the America is way more extroverted. And I noticed this when I first got to the UK, and very common in the UK, people will say, I need to have a think about that. And that's an introvert saying, time out. I'm going to go think about this before I come back. Or I need to noodle this, right? Go noodle this for a while and come back. And so I invite you to introduce those terms into your conversations. And especially if you are an introvert, make no apology. I need to have a think about this. I'll get back to you tomorrow. And if you're working with introverts, encourage them. I know take some time to think about this. I'm really interested and I want your best answer. So go take some time. Tell me in the morning, tell me Friday. Go have a think about this. So I love that phrase. It's very British and it just fits this notion of introvert, extrovert. So I have a little rule of thumb here that kind of helps us go from being unskilled networkers to skilled networkers in a simple, tongue-in-cheek, perhaps a little too cynical rule of thumb. And it says, if you don't know something about an extrovert, you haven't been listening, right? And okay, so sorry, that's not exactly fair, but in general, an extrovert, very comfortable talking, so just let them go, right? I sometimes, if I am kind of low energy and I come across one of these people, I just let them go, right? Just ask a question, ask another one, they'll just go on, right? And the flip side of that is if you don't know something about an introvert, you haven't asked. Because there's a gold mine of information in their heads. They're thinking, they're processing, they're connecting dots, they're trying to make sense of things, and they don't necessarily have a need to verbalize them. Now, to turn this into some networking advice, let me just clarify here that would be the rule of thumb for unskilled extroverts and unskilled introverts. But networking skills are just a subset of social skills. And so let's just upskill this then. So you're an extrovert. How do you be a skilled extrovert? Well, stop talking. right? Don't, we're speaking on behalf of the introverts here. We're very grateful that you're very comfortable striking up the conversation. Perfect. That's great. But don't dominate the conversation, right? Stop talking. Ask a few questions. Inquire. Listen. So that's it. It's that simple, right? It's not hard to be a skilled networker. Just pay attention, a little self-awareness, a little awareness to the person you're talking to. And if you sense that they're an introvert, know that you kind of got to draw it out of them, right? It's you got to do that. So that makes you skilled. And introverts, I'm not going to let you off the hook here because we are just as responsible. So you got to just speak up sometimes. Your thoughts will never be fully formed. Get over that, right? Just put some stuff out there and it's okay. And part of what I learned on my 6 to 9 months of just observing people is stuff just comes out. Right? People just say the dumbest things and, hey, how are you? Not much. What's up with you? Yeah, okay. Just, so what? Just say it. You don't need to have all your thoughts more fully formed. And I think it's a dirty little secret, but the way the extroverts are just kind of speaking to think, they kind of don't mind being interrupted that often. You just jump in, especially in a social situation where you're quote unquote networking, right? Just butt in. So that's what makes an introvert a little more skilled is just say something, speak up. Don't wait to be asked. And extroverts, just take a moment, self-awareness, try to get a read on the person you're speaking with and ask a few questions. Okay, that is the gist of it. Let's do a bit of Q&A now. What do we got here? Anything good come up while I was yakking away, Camille? I'm going to scroll back a bit because I filled it up with...
I don't see any questions just yet.
Any thoughts come to mind here? We'll just take a minute. I've been going for 30 minutes strong here. What do you guys think so far?
I have a question, actually. This
Cool.
is good. So we've been talking about this sort of myth of the networking event, but the reality is that they do exist and they can be helpful, as you acknowledged. What's your advice for someone that is of the introverted inclination when going to a networking event? What's the best way to harness that and make it useful for yourself?
Awesome. I actually have, I think, several chapters on this in my book. I had some slides on this. I'll put them, let me just give you the nutshell. Be prepared. And this is especially true for introverts, but I beg extroverts to follow our lead here because we're onto something. And by that, I mean, be prepared energy-wise. So as an introvert, especially, that is extra work for me. If I'm on my way to a networking event, I have to do a couple of things to be ready. First of all, I have to have pre-thought some things that I'm likely to say, right? I have to pre-think, and we're going to have some guidelines on what actually the substance of that is, but I have to kind of pre-think my elevator pitch. What am I going to say? And that depends on who I'm going to meet with, because it really depends if I'm meeting with some technical people or some coaching people or some spirit, whatever, I'm going to have a different kind of presentation. So pre-prepare those thoughts. I actually have to personally work on just energizing myself emotionally. One of the things about me, at least as an introvert, is the veneer does not necessarily, the exterior does not really necessarily reflect the interior. I could be just having the grand old time and look pretty gruff on the exterior. So I have learned to find ways to actually kind of perk up the exterior. So I have a playlist on my phone called Pump Me Up. I'll play that in the car on the way over. And it just, I've done it enough times now that they trigger for me. So those songs just, like I'm singing and I'm just bopping. And that's to tell my body, match your external energy with the way you feel internally, right? So be prepared. And then I will also do a lot of reconnaissance, by which I mean, if I know who I'm meeting with, I'll look you up in advance. I'll look through my notes if we've spoken before, just kind of refresh my memory on what you're doing and where you're at and what your kids' names are. I will absolutely look you up on LinkedIn. That's what it's for. So I'll get some stuff in my head. And what that's doing is it's pre-populating I got to have my thoughts more fully formed, right? So I'm pre-populating as much of that as I can so that when I do meet you, I've got something to work with. So that's the be prepared. The actual time of the event, I say it's a performance. I think it's a performance for all of us, but introverts, this is especially true. My partner and I have this thing we call curtain up. I will text her right before an event. It's like, curtain up. I'm going on stage. And it's not insincere. It's absolutely genuine, but it's me telling my body that it's a performance now. And so I'm on. And so that's another thing, just kind of gear up. And then I ask questions, I engage. I don't worry about large groups of people. if in fact the noise level is too, I went to an event a couple of years ago now. It was an annual meeting of the Raleigh coaches in Raleigh, Durham. The noise level was so high in that conference room that I could tell my cortisol levels were off the charts. I was catatonic. And I'm like, I can't do this. And I stepped out into the lobby of the hotel conference room and I sat on the couch. And you know what happened? Within 10 minutes, 6 more people had joined me. And for the next hour, we had the greatest conversation. The point being, do it your way. If the big noisy room doesn't work for you, step out into the lobby, catch your breath, put some thoughts together. I can't guarantee you're going to get followed by 6 people, but more often than not, you will. So just do it your way. Don't try to do it. You know, the extroverts, I have a friend in Raleigh also who's just both one of the most extroverted people I know and masterful at this. And he just floats around a room. He's smiling and shaking hands and just from person to person. That's not me. Don't try to do that. Don't. Admire it, but don't try to do that. So that's my advice for introverts. And extroverts, you'll notice us, right? Don't for God's sakes drag me to the center of the room. I'll kill you, right? That is not, come on over here, join the party. So anyway, there's a lot more to it than that. I think there's a chapter, it might be 3 chapters. It's at least one on how this before, during, and after how to do this. But you absolutely can do it. And you can do it in a way that honors you and your preferences and the relationships you're trying to build and nurture. Excellent. Okay, I haven't even actually got to the how yet. So this is all preamble, prerequisite stuff. So let me keep going here. Now I want to talk about how do you do this? So I set out on this quest to figure out what is networking, and now we're going to answer that. Now, again, we know kind of what it wants to be in the abstract sense, right? Building professional relationships in a meaningful way. But how do we do that? How do we think about this? How do we engage with this? This is the question I set out to answer. You'll be glad to know I answered it. And here's how I got to it. I'm staring at this question on a whiteboard. I was perplexed by it. And it became for me what we call in this mathematics anyway, an intractable question. Like, I know what it isn't. It's not noisy bars. It's not events. It's not begging and groveling. So what is it? And one of the techniques you can use when you find yourself up against an intractable, unsolvable problem is maybe you can break that problem down into something smaller, or smaller pieces. If you can chip that into smaller pieces and solve those, then you can maybe build it back up and answer the bigger question. So this was my goal. What is networking? But it struck me as intractable until I broke it down. And if you look at that question, and I swear I was looking at it on a whiteboard one day and it hit me, that buried inside that question is a more fundamental question. And that more fundamental question is simply, what is a network? And I dare say, unless you've talked to me before, read my book, you've never thought about that. We don't actually think about what is my network, right? And our kind of instant reaction is, well, it's my names in my address book or my LinkedIn connections or my Facebook friends or whatever, right? But is that a network? I asked this question when I was first developing this material. I was actually back at Berkeley talking to some alumni. And bless her heart, she really meant this. But I said, what is a network? And she said, it's everyone I've ever met and everyone I ever will. And I was like, oh, like, really? Like, that's good. But what the heck do I do with that? Like, all the way back to like grade school and that goofball in my neighborhood, is that my network? And everyone I ever will? I mean, it seemed unuseful to me. It's just not, so I needed a definition. I'm going to linger here because this is the foundation. If we get this right, everything else just kind of flows. So I needed something more substantial. I needed something more prescriptive that I could use as a definition of a network. And it finally hit me. And this comes from, it's actually graph theory and mathematics, or just networking theory and engineering and computer science. But part of what I was getting wrong, at least, is a network is not people, right? We tend to think of your network, okay, the names on my address book. No, those are just names. Right? Those are just people in an address book. No, a network is not people. It is the space between you. It's the links between you. It's the relationships between you. It's the connections between, whatever word really feels good for you there, right? It's the space in between. Now, that may sound simple, but it turns out to be very profound. So just linger with me here, because we're going to get this and we're going to embed this, and then everything else is going to build on top of it. So let's look at that space between us, that connection between me and all the people I know. They have lots of characteristics, but I've concluded those connections have two very, very powerful, I dare say, magical characteristics that really open the world up for us, right? Because each and every one of those connections between you and everyone you know has a degree of freshness. How fresh is that connection? Right? You meet someone this morning, you chat with them on the phone this morning, that connection is very fresh, right? But it fades. It fades rather quickly, in my opinion, right? I like to say they have a half-life, right? So I think the half-life is about 30 or 3 months for me. So if I connect with someone, I chatted with an old friend yesterday, in 3 months, the freshness of that connection is half. And in 3 more months, it's a quarter. And in 9 months, it's an eighth. And in a year, it's a 16th is fresh. And that's a pretty faded connection, right? If you're a visual person, you can think of the freshness of that connection as how bright it is. So you can almost now just close your eyes and think about all those names in your address book, not as names, but as rays of light. How bright are they? And some are really bright because you just chatted with someone this week, and some are really faded, right? So all of those connections have a degree of freshness. And somewhat mutually exclusive, all of those connections have a degree of strength. And if you're visual here, think of the strength as how thick it is. And now you absolutely can visualize your network. You can think about all those people, and you can visualize them, the level of brightness that it's almost pulsing, because some are fading and some are getting freshened every day, and some are really thick, right? And I had another friend I talked to just a couple days ago. I haven't seen her in 10 years, but my God, that bond is strong. Nothing could, what the hell? Nothing could, Jesus, go away. My phone has just started doing something really bizarre. Okay, sorry about that, people. I have no idea what that was. I'm going to turn my phone off. Huh. Strangest thing. I really apologize for that, people. Sorry. Yeah, extrovert alarm really pulled me out of my zone. Thanks a lot, people. All right. So you've got this sense of freshness and strength, right? And now I can say, because I just asked, what is a network? I got an answer now. A network is the totality of the connections between me and everyone I know, as defined by the freshness and strength of each of those connections. That's a definition. And I'm being a bit pedantic here, and it might be the mathematician in me, but that's relevant, right? So what is a network? It's the totality of all the connections I have between me and everyone I know. It's not people, it's that space between us. And I'm going to define that space between us in terms of how fresh and how bright it is, right? So I want you to think about this. I want you to do just a 30-second exercise. Just close your eyes for 30 seconds. I'll try to shut up for 10 of them. And I just want you to think of 3 people, the first 3 names that pop into your mind of people where the connections are really fresh. Not too hard, right? Probably somebody you chatted with recently. Now do the same thing for strength. Think of 3 people in your network where that connection is really strong. Just bonds go deep, right? Go really thick. So congratulations, you're networking, right? And I'd love you to extend this exercise. I actually do this constantly. It's kind of how I think about my network. And on a very structured level, twice a year, I go through all my LinkedIn connections, alphabetical A through Z, 1 letter a week. And I go through a little exercise of how did I meet this person? How fresh is this connection? Do I wish it were fresher? How strong is this connection? Do I wish it were stronger? What are they working on? What could I do to be helpful? Do I know anything? And, God, I have like 1,000 connections now. Probably every time through, I pick 10% of them. And that's even a lot. I'm an introvert, but I'll reach out to a couple dozen, maybe a dozen through that process, and just say, it's been a while, let's freshen the connection. So that's networking, right? That's networking. Freshening Connections. So that exercise in itself, just the thought process, how fresh is this connection? Do I wish it were fresher? How strong is this connection? Do I wish it were stronger? That is actually networking as well. Sure, you got to get out and connect with people once in a while, but you also have to do this part, because if you don't do this part, you're not deliberately building a network. You're just kind of free-for-alling, whoever you can run across at an event. So I think it's really kind of an important part. So therefore, I guess we can also answer this question: what is networking now, right? Because if you buy that, are you with me? Are you with me so far? Do you buy the idea that a network is this totality of connections based on freshness and strength? I need you to kind of see if that sits with you, because if you do, kind of done. My work is done, because you know the answer to this next question now. Right? Because if a network is this web of relationships based on freshness and strength, then networking, the act of building that network or nurturing that network, would be anything that freshens or strengthens a link, right? Anything. And I will grant that, events are good. I will grant that meeting new people is kind of good. You need to add people now and then, although it's not the bulk of networking. We get lost on that, right? The bulk of your networking energy should be going towards freshening and strengthening the relationships that you already have. And I'm going to add a huge qualifier here, because this is kind of the heart of my whole message, and it links back to the stuff we said on introverts and extroverts. So hear me on this. Networking is anything that creates, freshens, or strengthens a connection for you. And anything that does not create, freshen, or strengthen a connection or relationship for you is not networking for you. Permission to stop doing it, right? I don't really go to events anymore, occasionally, but not to network, and not to beat myself up at how bad I am at this, right? I go through an entirely different realm of processes and connecting with people in very different ways in order to freshen and strengthen and create as well. So I want to dive into these. I don't have an enormous amount of time left, but I want to dive into these a little bit. This idea of creating connection. Yeah, some of your network connections should come new, right? But I will say, by the way, that also you can't have an infinitely large network. So that process I go through twice a year, some of those get archived. They're not in my active network right now. And that's okay. But this idea of creating new connections, yeah, sometimes, and they come through serendipity. We're not doing a lot of events or meeting people at the water cooler at work these days, but also you can get a new connection because someone introduces someone to you. So as we go on later here, remember, we're talking about sharing who and what you know. And when your network is really vibrant, people are meeting people saying, you need to meet so-and-so. In fact, that's how I got on this. Hooked up with Camille and you guys. This Traverse Connect has been a fantastic introduction, because someone in my network says you need to meet Camille. And so that's how it's done, right? Create new connections. It happens a fair amount. But it's not the dominant. I should not say this. There's 3 ways you create connections. Serendipity. You just run into people, or an email comes into your inbox and that person has offered to introduce you to someone. Wonderful. But don't leave the entire fate of your network to serendipity. I would say about 50% of your network connections kind of come that way, but at least 40% of them need to be deliberate. You need to be on the lookout. Who are the kind of people I want in my network right now? What relationships, what professions, what particular people do I want to have in my network? And what do I need to do to be ready to connect with them? Because a lot of times we have this sense of just want to, collect business cards versus engaging with people in a way that's going to be mutually beneficial, that we're both going to share who and what we know in some kind of meaningful way. So I think about it with a deliberate sense. I'll give examples of that. Early on, when I was setting up my coaching practice, and actually still to this day, I just have a magnetic attraction to creatives of any kind, especially designers, musicians, artists. Just given. And so I will just, in fact, I tell a story, I'll squeeze it in. We were selling a washer and dryer one day. We live in Durham, and we put it on Craigslist, and I got an email from someone inquiring about the dimensions, right? Is it going to fit in my house? I wrote back. Turned out to be too big for where they needed to put it in their house. But I noticed in his signature that he was a graphic designer. I love graphic designers. I went to his website. It was awesome. So I said, bummer about the washer dryer, but I see that you're a graphic designer. Would you like to get together for a cup of coffee someday? That was years ago now, we got together every week for at least 6 months. We totally hit it off. We had this great idea for a co-working space that we called Real Space. I swear it was WeWork 10 years or 5 years before WeWork came along, without all the public or private equity garbage that they layered on top of it. The point being, because I was on the lookout for creatives and I saw that in his signature, I built a really good relationship. And we just chatted a few weeks ago again. So the relationship continues. And that's the point. There's a deliberateness to it. Where are you in your career? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to grow into your business, right? Not from a groveling perspective, but just who are the people that I want to surround myself with? Go deliberately looking for them. And then I also have this sense of aspirational, some small percentage. I have this kind of aspirational contact list. There are people I'd like to meet. And this is especially a case where, what do I have to do to be ready? Right. So Susan Cain has been someone I admire. There's a couple other authors in that space that I really appreciate. And now that I finally got my book out last year, I'm like, okay, I'm probably ready now, right? There's people I could, so if the opportunity comes up, I would love to connect with that person. So they served as aspirational contacts for me. So be deliberate in your creating. Don't just leave it to serendipity. Freshening connections. I already talked about the decay factor, right? So they decay, half-life, right? So in 6 months, a year, it's just down to a 16th. But what that means also is there's no way you can keep the entire 1,000 or however many people you've ever met in your life active. So you think about it in concentric circles. You have an inner circle, which I think of as a monthly group. That's a pretty small group for me. There might only be half a dozen people in there, where if more than a month goes by, I'm going to make a point to reach out to them. Gee, we haven't talked in a while. Let's just do a quick catch up, or maybe just an email. How you doing? The next circle out's quite a bit larger. That's the quarterly group. And that's part of what I'm going through as I go through my LinkedIn every 6 months as well. Is kind of what circle are they in right now? So monthly, quarterly, and then annually. And, annual is pretty big group. You can birthdays, holidays, right? You can kind of ping almost everyone in your network at least once a year. They're not inner circle, so it's not going to be a really deep, strong connection at that particular time. But so this idea of freshening, lest it overwhelm you, think of it as these 3 concentric circles. And then there's people I've met, so I disagree with everyone I've ever met, because there's people outside of those 3 circles that I don't consider part of my network. They're friends or former acquaintances. But in terms of the way I'm thinking about maintaining a network of professional relationships, they're outside of those 3 circles. All right, we'll spend the rest of the day talking about this notion of how do I strengthen connections, because this is really the heart of it now, that if you want to build meaningful relationships, the idea is not just, 1,000 light, weak connections where I keep them fresh, but some of those, and a small subset, by the way. So every relationship can't be strong, but a small subset of them, I want to strengthen them. And I want to do that deliberately as well. So that's where we're going to really kind of transform your thinking here. And this has been the free lifesaver for me that set me free to network in a completely different way. So the idea of strengthening relationships, I'm going to borrow directly from the social psychologists. They know how to do this. Right. And I leaned on a book here by a guy named Keith Ferrazzi. He wrote a book called Never Eat Alone. It's actually brilliant. And a lot of my ideas are borrowed from him. I'll agree to that. The reason that I didn't just recommend his book directly is because Ferrazzi is just off the charts extroverted. So I'm like, Keith, these are good things, but I got to find a way to work as an introvert. So even the title, Never Eat Alone, I'm like, oh no, I have to have, when I'm traveling, I need at least 1 meal a day where I'm just going to have some time to myself. But he gave me this idea, and he describes it this way, that the way you strengthen a relationship, and catch this phrase because I'm going to repeat it a lot, the way you strengthen a relationship is through the constant exchange of favors and information. The constant exchange of favors and information, that I'm trying to do a favor for you, or I'm going to ask you for a favor. You're going to do a favor for me. I'm going to provide some information. That mentality of being on the lookout for an opportunity to do a favor or share some information is what strengthens relationships. So if you go back to the very beginning, when I said in a nutshell, you're going to share who and what you know. An introduction is a favor. Right? Some information on an article or an introduction is in some ways information as well. But this notion of constant exchange of favors and information. So I want you to think about it, just for sake of illustration. Let's pretend we're at a networking event, I guess, and you're talking to someone you've just met for the first time. The typical scenario is what's going through your mind and what's going through their mind. Well, in the old world, what's going through their mind, and I'm afraid it was going through my mind because I didn't know any better, was what can this person do for me, right? Which I argue is just like 2-year-old narcissism, right? That's the ideology of a 2-year-old, right? So this sense of what can you do for me is what drove me away from networking for 20 years in the first place. Instead, I want to find some way to do a favor for you. Now, the trick is, and that's where we're going to spend the next 10, 15 minutes. The trick is, how do I figure out what that favor might be? And I don't always think of something, but what I'm trying to do is look, as I'm chatting with someone, I'm trying to steer the conversation and get into something a little more substantial than sports or weather, because I'm trying to figure out who do I know and what do I know that could help you. And I literally run those two questions on a loop through my brain. They're just endless loop. We're conversing and I'm asking questions and I'm like, say more. And I see you do this. And while you're talking, I'm listening intently with this filter. Who do I know? And what do I know that could help you be successful? Right? And that's the trick here. And I don't always think of something. In fact, I rarely think of something. It's, 10% of the time, maybe I think of something in that moment. Oh, you need to meet so-and-so, or let me send you this article, or here's a book I read that really blew my mind open on it. But most of the time, I'm just taking information in. And that could be for a number of reasons. I don't know enough about you yet. There's a whole depth to your life, and there's a depth to my life that hasn't intersected yet. So maybe I just haven't thought of it yet. Or maybe I haven't met that person yet that I need to introduce you to. It might be 2 weeks from now or 2 years from now. But when I do, I'll circle back and make that introduction. But nevertheless, this endless loop of who do I know and what do I know that could help you be successful. Right? So now I want to dig into, does that make sense? So your idea is, and every single relationship doesn't get strengthened. That just doesn't work that way. We have, the majority of our networking is just kind of freshening. But then I ask myself, is there some hook here? Is there some connection? Is there some simpatico at the moment that I could strengthen this with a favor or some information? And those get strengthened. And that's how it works. So the trick then is, how do I get into a conversation and how do I drive that conversation in a meaningful way so I can tap into my resources, right? So if we're sitting there talking about the weather, I got nothing to work with, right? Oh, so I guess let me cap this then. So networking is done. Answered the question, answered what a network is. Now I can answer what networking is. Anything that's creating, freshening, or strengthening links, done, redundant. Okay, let's move on. How do I then get to this point of tapping into my reservoir, my resources of who I know and what I know that might be helpful to you? I can tell you a few things that don't work, right? So first of all, this is kind of a given. The groveling part doesn't work. So if I come leading with the wrong hand, with my hand out now, and that's a little tricky, because if you're looking to grow your business, if you're looking to add customers, if you're looking for a job and you're looking to get hired, sorry, that's groveling, right? It works and it doesn't work. Sorry, there's a better way. Embrace the world with a spirit of helpfulness. And if you do this right, you'll surround yourself with people who want to do the same and they'll reciprocate, right? So groveling doesn't work. But here's another one that doesn't work. And this one's tricky because it looks well-intended, but I actually believe it's somewhat of a stiff arm, right? How can I help you, right? Name it. I don't know. I don't know what you know. I don't know who you know, right? So I actually find this somewhat of a lazy notion of networking. If all you're going to do is say, how can I help you? That's like me going into the doctor's office and he's like saying, what drug do you want? Or, I don't know, you're the doctor. Let me tell you what my symptoms are. And you tell me if there's some drug or some not drug preferably, but something that's going to help me feel better, right? So this sense of how can I help you is actually a push off. I don't care for it at all. And whenever I hear it, I can realize that's what's happening, right? And this one's a little more nuanced because this one's very well intended, but it just doesn't work very well, right? You're in a networking conversation and you're getting to know someone. You ask them, so what do you do? And the reason I bring this up, I actually have written, this is the world's worst networking question. It's a little hyperbolic. It's probably not that bad, but it's not a great networking question. And here's why. It's just flat. It's just what do you do? I'm a project manager. Oh, that's great. I'm a coach. I'm a teacher. It doesn't allow me. So great. You're a doctor. So who do I know or what do I know that could help you? right? So it's just a flat question. It's just a closed question. There's not much to it, and it doesn't facilitate any kind of conversation that would take us into something that would strengthen it. So it's polite, but it's not, it's just flat. It's just open-ended. So we have to have a better question. And I swear to you, I stumbled across this question in a little booklet on a site called changethis.org. And it's also one of the most profound things. So take this with you today. Your interactions with people are never going to be the same. I swear to you. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I'll go with it this time. Instead of saying, what do you do? Or what's up? Or whatever, here's the question. Oh, dang, I got ahead of myself. All right. So in order to get to that magic question, we got to talk about small talk. Forgot about this part. This is my favorite part. Everybody hates small talk. I used to absolutely hate it. Introverts, we wear our flags proudly. We hate small talk, right? And then one day I discovered a metaphor for what small talk really is. And once you understand what it is, you'll be free. It'll make you smile. You'll engage in it wholeheartedly, and you'll move right past it with finesse, and you'll get into more meaningful conversations, right? So I wanted to give you, I'm going to play you a little artifact from the 90s. Some of you will remember it. Some of you have probably heard it played on TV shows, whatever. But I want you to just turn up your speakers for a second. For 15 seconds, I'm going to play something from the early 90s, and then we're going to deconstruct it and show you how it's basically all that small talk is. So here you go. Did you hear that? Give me a thumbs up in the chat to make sure that works. Sometimes technical stuff. Did you hear the modem thing, the whole beeping and screeching and squelching of the modem? Somebody give me a yes in the chat that you did. Yes, excellent. All right. So I love that sound. It's cringeworthy. But let's deconstruct what's going on there. So here's what's going on, right? Back in the 80s and the 90s, we started to create machines that could communicate with one another. It started with fax machines, and then it got into computers. And back in those days, the connections were actually analog, which means in order for the data to be passed back and forth, they actually had to be converted into sound and sent across a telephone connection and reconverted back into data at the other end. So when two machines were connecting, they had a couple of things going on. The first was the technology was progressing very quickly, and there were all different generations of technology. They were called groups. So there was group 1 faxes and group 2 and group 3, and I think they got all the way up to group 5. Group 5 was the most advanced. So at 2 group 5 modems connected, or fax machines, they were using the latest protocols, right? So the very first part of that sound bite there is the two machines saying, what protocol are you using? Here's what I'm using. What's the best one between us? What's the optimal protocol that we are going to communicate on? Basically, it is, are we going to be able to communicate? And, at what's the optimal level of communication? And then the mode, and I'm not going to play it again, but if you want to go listen to one of this time, it's really kind of fun to deconstruct. The second half of that, then, once they've decided on the optimal protocol, they decided, how good is this phone line? Right? What speed are we going to connect? And if those of you who were around then, we went from 9600 to 14.4 to 5600K. What speed are these two lines going to communicate with? And I read this years ago, and I've been unable to find the author to give him credit, but this is the brilliant. That's what small talk is. And it is, you have to do it. It is unavoidable, because it's two people saying, are we going to be able to communicate? And if so, at what level? And you just can't start without it. And I will argue, and this is part of what I did in my 6-month just observation tour, is observing how people do small talk. And it's the funnest thing. And I argue we do this with strangers as well as people as closest to it as we can. Your spouse comes through the door at the end of the day and you say, hi, honey, how are you? And she's, wine. All right. Are we going to be able to communicate? Not till you've had a glass of wine, right? So are we going to be able to communicate? And if so, at what level? They come through the door and say, oh, you're not going to believe this. all right, we're going to be able to communicate. And that's the level today. So this whole notion of that's what small talk is. And I giggle at it now, right? As an introvert, I have to prep for small talk. So I'm a podcast junkie, and I actually round those out. I do a bit of culture, a bit of sports, a bit of current events, a bit of politics. I'm kind of ready to talk about anything and at least ask a good question about anything because I'm going to engage someone. So you got to do small talk. It is not torturous. It is this negotiation of, are we going to be able to communicate? And if so, at what level? The reason that introverts hate it so bad is most people are content to linger there. And if I'm just in a social situation, fine, let's talk politics, let's talk weather, whatever. But if I'm in a networking mindset and I'm trying to build a professional relationship, I got to get past that as quick as possible. So like the modem soundtrack, we've decided that a communication is possible. Let's get through that as quick as we can. And now I'm getting to that magic question, right? So how do I get past the what do you do question into something that allow me to blow past small talk and tap into my network? And that question is, and this is the magic. This is it. Take this home today, write this down, tattoo it on the back of your hand, put it on the back of your business card. This is the question you want to ask people, right? So you have your little chit chat about the weather, you have a little chit chat about the Pistons, whatever it is. And then you ask the person, so what are you working on? I love this question. I love it because it's a lean in question. And I love it because it's delightfully ambiguous, right? Depending on your context, how well this person knows you, how comfortable they feel with you, where they are in their life, what time of the day it is. They may go simple, they may go profound, they may go anywhere in between. I've come to think there's like 4 big categories to this. What are you working on at home? What are you working on at work? If you ask this question to a colleague, and you absolutely should, the whole last section of my book is on networking at work. You absolutely should ask this of your colleagues, in addition to other things as well. But what are you working on is absolutely relevant at work. So they're going to probably talk about what they're working on at work. But they may tell you that, they're trying to find a vet because their cat's sick, or they need to figure out how to do this homeschool, whatever, right? What are they working on at home? What are you working on at work? What are you working on in your career? What are you working on in life? Right? I'm trying to be more meditative. I'm trying to eat more mindfully, whatever. And it's amazing to me when you ask this question. Here's what's so powerful about this question. Well, first of all, I ask you, what are you working on? And then I get to run my loop. So as you're telling me what you're working on, in fact, here's the beauty of this question, the power of this question. I can't help but think, who do I know? And what do I know that could help you? It's inevitable. In fact, if you spring this question, or if you answer this question, even if the other person doesn't word it exactly this way, what you're working on, even though the other person hasn't been to the Heather Hollick School of Networking, they can't help themselves. They will start thinking, who do they know? And what do I know? That's what I mean by a lean in question. It just unlocks the helpfulness in the human spirit. So who do I know? And what do I know that could help you be successful? Right? That's it. That's the power of it. So that's how you strengthen relationships. That's how you get past the small talk. That's how you build relationships in a meaningful way. I use this phrase all the time now. All my networking emails, man, it's been a while. Last time we chatted, you were doing this. What are you working on now? I want to know what you're working on, right? And just to round this out, lest you think that I am advocating we all be doormats, people are going to ask you the same question. And you need to be prepared to answer. Now, this is especially for the introverts, but I actually will peg this on the extroverts as well. Because if you haven't come to an event or to a meeting, if we've decided to connect for a call, if you haven't really thought about when I ask you, what are you working on? I will ask, then you're not prepared, right? So think about, what are you working on? And this is some homework for you for the next couple of days. I want you to do it in all 4 of these categories. Right? Just give some thought. If someone were to say, what am I working on? Well, and again, the reason there's 4 categories, because it depends who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to the receptionist at your doctor's office, or you're talking to some friends in a club, they're different answers, and they're all true, right? You're working on a lot of things. So just be thinking about these big categories. What are you working on at home? What are you working on in your career? What are you working on at work or school? And what are you working on in life? And that gives you the ability. So here's why. So you want to be prepared. You want to be prepared because people are going to ask you. And I argue, and I have fun with this, so I wish you could see the tongue in my cheek. Oh, I put these in the wrong order. Beware alternate word endings, or alternate wordings, I mean. They don't always use those 5 words. They will ask you. But what they might say is, so what do you do? And I just smile. And I'll answer what I do. I'm a coach or a teacher, writer, whatever. And then I say, but then I complete the rest of the thought with, and I'm working on. So what's up, Heather? I'm working on. So I answer the question whether they phrase it that way or not. I presume they want to be helpful. My experience is assuming that people want to be helpful. 99% of them want to be. Some of them didn't know it, but the rest, they do. So if I deliver that way, I can help them help me. And I'm not groveling. I'm just sharing what I'm working on. And it's such a lean in question that people can't help themselves. They automatically they think, who do I know and what do I know that could help you be successful? All right, I have run out of time. So that's the networking mindset. It's create, freshen, and strengthen connections. Think about the space between you and work on those connections, those relationships. I'm a T on the Myers-Briggs, so I use the word connections and links a lot. For the Fs on the Myers-Briggs, I probably should use the word relationships because that's more human. Sorry about that. Anyway, I like the word connections. I would say my philosophy of life is embrace the world with a spirit of helpfulness, sharing the who and what you know with the world, and most importantly, honor your preferences, honor who you are, honor where you are in life, honor your energy levels. If you don't feel like going to an event or doing it today, don't do it today. You're not going to be your best self anyway. Do it your way. And I'm going to take the last 10 minutes. I was going to talk a bit about LinkedIn, but we don't have time. So let's just say, what's questions, comments? Here's some over in the Q&A. And add some more to the Q&A now. So I make sure if you did post something in the chat earlier, it's scrolled off from me. So put it back in there. How can extroverts make introverts feel more at ease in addition to listening? Thank you, Eric. Great question. The best way you can make us feel at ease is to honor that fact that we need time to process our questions, right? Like I was saying, my partner's like, okay, I'm telling you this and I don't want an answer till Friday. So I'm just going to let you noodle this. That is so honoring to me. That feels like she gets me, right? And I've had bosses do the same, right? Go noodle this. If you're leading a team and you're doing a brainstorming session or you're having a team meeting, don't make the decision at the end of the meeting because you're not honoring and you're not getting your best work out of your introverts. So have the discussion at the team meeting. Tell the people that I'm going to make a decision tomorrow. And introverts, I need you to circle back with the ideas that you get because I know you're going to get some. So it's that honor that fact that, and it's not a deficiency. It's how their brain works. Just give them room to do it. All right. With COVID over the last year, I've dropped the ball on keeping relationships. Yes. And the thing is, me too, but I don't have any excuses because relationships are about freshening and strengthening mostly. So yeah, I haven't done a lot of new connections lately, but I have tremendous opportunity to freshen and strengthen. Go through your LinkedIn connections, right? Go through and do what I do. How fresh is this connection? Do I wish it were fresher? Shoot them an email if you wish it were fresher. How strong is this connection? What are they working on? Is there something I know or somebody I know that I could introduce them to? So do that part of it. That's actually easier now. People are taking calls. People are looking for those emails. So there's kind of no excuse, even though we kind of all went into a funk there for a while, but let's come out of it, right? Make the effort we're not going to all get together at the annual conference, but we can still look through our connections and deliberately make efforts to freshen and strengthen them. Jonathan, great question. How much time do I spend freshening and strengthening? Depends on so many things. My energy level, life situations. I've just been going through the situation. My mom just passed a few weeks ago. So none in the last few weeks. But then this week, I'm starting to emerge from that. People are coming back. So whatever you have capacity for. Right? Whatever your capacity is, do it your way. There are no rules. There are no numbers. There are no minimum number of people in each of those, monthly, quarterly, annual circles. But just know that connecting with one another, I actually conclude the book with this. We are a deeply interconnected species. In fact, we are deeply interconnected with everything else on the planet. I love to go into the whole gut biome. We don't even digest our own food. We are so interdependent on other people and other species that just lean into that. And so, go through one way to do it is just, I do say a little bit of serendipity pops in here. I'll be on Twitter, I'll be on social media, and somebody will pop into my mind. That's the sign. Act on that. Circle back. You've been on my mind a couple times lately. What's going on? What are you working on? Let's connect. Do you have time for a chat? Or let's at least, I don't presume everybody doesn't have time for a phone call, but yeah, there is no numbers. There is what it depends where you are in life and how much energy you have. What about connections that I always need you to lead with making the connection? What do you do if it's beneficial, but it makes me wary? Are you asking about LinkedIn? Because I'm really picky about LinkedIn. So I have several chapters in my book on LinkedIn. I think it's the most amazing tool. I wanted to go into that today, but I didn't have time. I think it's a really important tool for networking. It's more than just social networking. It's actually, it's the database of record for your career. But I don't connect with people willy-nilly. I only connect with people, and here's my magic phrase. I only connect with people I know well enough to recommend with confidence. And so all of the people on my connection, I know they would take my call, right? And I've done that over the years, and I've been on it a long time. That's how I got up to 1,000 connections. And it's getting a little bit cumbersome with that many people. But I do know that I've maintained those connections over the year, and I am confident I can recommend those people with confidence. So what do I do if somebody randomly comes out to me? 80% of the time, I ignore them because this is not Twitter. Follow me on Twitter if you want to connect, but this is not Twitter for me. 10% of the time, 20% of the time, I'll look at the person and think there might be something here. So I will connect. That gives me access to your email. And I'll send you an email and I'll explain to you that I only connect to people that I know well enough to recommend with confidence. So tell me a bit about yourself. What are you working on? Where are you? Here's a little bit about me. And oh, by the way, would you be interested in connecting for a call? And 10% of the time we connect, and I add those people to my network as well. And so I do that in a way that I can maintain some integrity. This is my tribe. They're the people to whom I'm loyal, and I trust are loyal to me. And I don't say that lightly. And I do that because I maintain this level of integrity with it. And I do that for a number of reasons. Mostly it's just because it's the way I roll. But I also have a thing in the book I call the LinkedIn bridge, because by doing that, I have access to all my first and second degree connections that are on LinkedIn. And that's an amazing number of people. So if you go to LinkedIn and you search for a really common word like you'll get a result and it'll tell you how many results are there. So then go up to the filters that pop up at the top and filter by first and second degree connections only and look at that number. Now, those are the number of people that if you've maintained some integrity to your network, you have access to all those people. I have millions. It's amazing to me, right? But all of my 1,000 people are connected to a lot of people, and that gives me access to millions of people. And what I mean by being connected to them is of all those people, if it's a first degree connection, I got their email. I'm connected with them. And if it's a second degree connection, I've built my network in such a way, I know I can reach out to that first degree connection and say, hey, I see you're connected to so-and-so. Do you know them well enough to introduce me? Would you mind making an introduction? And so by maintaining my network that way, I have this wonderful web of first and second degree connections that is just an incredible asset. Right. And so I think what your question was, or the one I chose to answer, was I ignore most of those. I just thank you, but I don't owe you anything. You're just randomly clicking or you think you have to make a better investment than that. Right. You have to make some reason that why we should be connected. And then I will circle back. And probably 10, 20% of those I circle back, and 10% of those we actually schedule a call. I think I'm out of time, Camille. I've yacked my head off. I hope that was helpful.
You are right on time. Thank you so much. I have to say that for me, this was what stuck with me most today is this idea that I'm already networking.
Yes.
But you asked us to do this visualizing exercise to visualize both our fresh and our strong networks. And then you congratulated us on that. And I think that was so helpful because that's it. We are networking. And it's so refreshing when so much of us are working from home right now and in many ways being forced to be rather introverted, whether we like it or not. Yes. So it's just so great to get that encouragement that we can network from our own homes.
Go forth.
Incredibly helpful for me. So as always, Heather, it's been such a pleasure to listen to you and to hear your insights. And I'd like to remind our audience that this webinar is one in a series that will be held between now and the end of December. And the webinars are all designed for the innovative mindset, focusing on entrepreneurship lessons for small businesses, startups, and creative freelancers. And they're all free to attend and everyone is welcome. So you can check out the lineup for the rest of the year at traversconnect.com/events. Well, thank you everyone for joining and taking part. And thank you so much, Heather. It's been wonderful to have you today. Thank you so much. Over and out.